Hello everybody, welcome to a brand new Dominions 5 Let's Play series. This is a series that we're going to be playing as MA Ulm, which is a pretty good nation and a fun nation to play. They're sort of unique in quite a few ways. And a lot of people enjoy playing them, but there's a lot of... they're kind of easy to play simply, but there's also a lot of depth that you can get into with the nation, which is a lot of fun. Now, I wasn't sure if I was going to record this game at all. This is a multiplayer game, and in fact, the game has already finished, for me at least. So, spoilers, right out the gate, I'm telling you that I lose, I guess, relatively early on in this game. But I've decided to record the series afterwards anyways, because I really, first of all, I like Ulm. I love the map that we're playing on. And I was just eager to get a series out on this map just to get it out there and show to you guys because it's a really beautiful map. And so, yeah, I just wanted to showcase a series on it. Like I said, I like Ulm a lot. They have some really interesting strengths and weaknesses. And I hope I get to play another game as Ulm in the future. But in this game, like I said, even though we are eventually going to lose, there were a lot of really interesting and kind of really good fights. Like I was kind of able to really make a lot of things work. And they were not all perfect, but I thought it was a good sort of educational experience. And Ulm gives us a good opportunity to... like the toolkit is very limited, but... there's like you can learn a lot more about the mechanics of the game, especially like just the regular combat with the conventional troops and things like that. So it's I think it's worth it to record this series as a let's play. Now this game was played. It wasn't played by email. It was like on a server, and so that means that sometimes when I was the last to do the turn, it kind of overwrote some of the turns. I have almost all of the turns, but there might be a couple missing ones. And so we're also not going to do one turn per episode. I'm going to try to keep it to about 30-minute episodes, thereabouts, so we'll just fit in as many turns as we can in an episode and then move on to the next one. Like I said, I've played this game already, so I kind of know how everything ends up. The other thing is this game, well, like all multiplayer games, there's a lot of diplomacy. And in this game, there was a lot of diplomacy, and it pretty much all failed, which is why we ended up losing. So I will explain that the diplomacy was very interesting, was sort of critical to the outcome of the game. But I'm not going to focus too much on the diplomacy. Instead, we'll focus, I guess, more on some of the scripting and things like that, I guess. And finally, I should say, no, I think that's pretty much it. So what I'd like to do in this first episode, as usual, is we'll do the nation overview, and then we'll do the build that I've chosen. And then in the next episode, I think we'll go over the map, and maybe combine that with the first actual turn of gameplay, because it's a really beautiful map. So by the way, we're playing on, the map is Pankor system. It is I'll just show you the sneak peek. Next episode, we'll have the detailed look at the map. It's a beautiful map. There are maybe some different versions that people have like adjusted the connections and stuff like that, but it's kind of this space-inspired map. You have these big planets. It's meant for 18 players, 14 land plus 4 underwater nations. And you're separated by these planets, but there are these connections. So a lot of choke points between the planets that are important to control. Also, most planets have predetermined, like very large and rich provinces that you want to control, right? And you want to get your income from there. So just it really adds a lot of strategic depth. Now I don't think it's perfectly balanced in a lot of ways, but I don't mind that. I think it's a really fun map to play on. And it's just beautiful too. Like kudos to I guess Loki who made this map. It's just I think it's really beautiful. So anyways, we'll get more into the map later. I should point out that the host originally tried to get, he wanted to do an LA game on this map, but it kind of failed because LA doesn't have the right number of nations, and it kind of screwed up, and so the game got turned into an MA game, which is kind of what this map was designed to be for. So, anyways, let's do the nation overview. So we are playing as MA Ulm. MA Ulm is a nation that is known for a few things. So first of all, it's known for forging items, and that is because the mages, like the master smiths, have a forge bonus of 2. And so if you combine that with like a dwarven hammer, they can make fire or earth or any of their randoms like astral or air items for like 4 gems cheaper. So any 5 gem item is just going to cost 1 gem, which is amazing. So for example, you could make a ton of lanterns, right? The fire lanterns for research for like 1 fire gem each, and your research can go through the roof. Early on in the game, you could do it with owl quills. So yeah, but there are tons of things like that you can do, right? So they're known for being good at forging stuff. The other thing that they are known for is they have you play drain scales with them because the researchers are not affected by drain. So you could take drain 3 and still research at your full speed. So that's also fantastic. The troops of Ulm are very strong in terms of their protection. They're a bit weak to magic. And also, I think the other kind of defining characteristic of Ulm is their evocation magic. So the Ulm mages have and the mage priests have a special spell that's just a really powerful evocation spell. So those are kind of like the 3 broad things that Ulm is known for. But let's dig in a bit more detail. Let's go through the troops. So we have random war dogs, which are not often used, although it's interesting to note that for 7 gold and 7 resources, you can get a 15 protection little dog here. Unfortunately, them being undisciplined makes them a little harder to use effectively, but they're size 1, so you can get 6 of these per square. You know, they can be... there could be some shenanigans involving these dogs, for sure. Okay, then the troops. This is something I'd like to spend some time talking about. Not all right now, but we'll talk about it during the game. There are a lot of troops, and especially for a new player, it might not be clear like which one you should be choosing. And there are subtle and important differences between all of these troop types. First of all, every troop has like 2 versions, and there's sort of a more expensive and higher protection version. So, for example, the battle axe infantry, the cheap version has 19 protection, and then the expensive one has 23 protection. So every infantry has these 2 versions. So basically in the early game, you don't have a lot of resources, you build the cheap ones, and when you can start to afford it, then you switch to the fancy ones, basically, right? It's worth noting that your mages that you'll be recruiting, the master smiths, provide a resource bonus of 10. So as you get these mages pumped out, you will have a ton of resources, plus you usually take good scales with Ulm. But in addition to the good scales, you will have the additional resources, so it's actually pretty easy to get a bunch of these guys, even though they're 37 resources each. So we have a few weapon choices in our basic infantry. Before I go into detail, let's get out of the way the other guys that we have here. There is a crossbowman, but be careful, this crossbowman, although he is range 50 and 15 damage, he only fires once every 3 rounds, which is really, really slow. So usually you do not ever build this crossbowman. Even though it's a powerful crossbow, firing once every 3 rounds is like just painfully slow. The damage per second, if you will, of the combat it's really rough. There is another crossbowman, which is the sapper. This is a regular crossbow, but it's the only thing that's special about this one is, well, except for the super high protection, which all Ulm troops have, it has a siege bonus of 5. but they're kind of expensive. 20 gold, 37 resources. Like, this is very situational. If you really need to add extra siege power, I guess you could make some of these. But generally speaking, the crossbow, Almond doesn't really need to make troops that have crossbows because your mages are essentially crossbows. And we'll get that into that a little bit. We also have heavy cavalry, the Black Knight. Heavy cav is pretty strong in Dominions in general. Although it seems expensive, resources are not really a big issue for Ulm because you will have the Master Smiths giving you a lot of resource bonuses. And so they only cost 45 gold, so that's not bad. Unlike the other heavy cav, like for example Man or Marignan or pretty much every other nation's heavy cav, they have fairly low defense. And that's because their full plate armor has a defense penalty, but they have very high protection. But they have very high protection and 15 hit points. It's not. They're definitely usable if you need some high combat speed troops to do some attack rear maneuvers. You can also you could expand with these. You don't. There are other choices too. You don't need to use them, especially early game. It's hard to get a lot of these out, but they're kind of viable. I wouldn't build a strategy around them, but you can make something happen with them. It's worth pointing out that their weapon is a Morning Star, and so again, with Ulm, we're going to get into the specific details of a lot of these weapons. So the Morning Star has a defense penalty, which is part of the reason why this heavy cav has such low defense. Most of the other heavy cav in the game will have a sword, and a sword actually adds defense usually. So they would have 3 more defense if this was a sword. Here we're taking a -2 penalty. However, the Morningstar has a +2 attack versus shield, and it can either do blunt or pierce, and it actually does. These guys have decent strength, so it does a lot of damage. So anyway, so that's worth pointing out. And then Ulm does not have a sacred unit. They do, however, have an anti-sacred unit, which is the Guardian, which is a cap-only troop. It is a basic infantry. However, its weapon is a black halberd, which does a whopping 27 damage, length 3, and importantly, it has this effect, Bane of Heresy, which only affects gods and sacred units, and it does an extra 15 armor-piercing fatigue damage with an area of effect 1. So these guys are amazing versus sacreds. So even though you don't have your own sacreds, if somebody is, doing some kind of meme bless or just sacred strategy, yeah, Guardians will chop them up. And they're not too expensive. Again, resources, don't be too afraid. With Ulm, you're going to have a lot of resources. And because they're not sacred, you could recruit like 10 of these in your cap per turn, assuming you have the resources and recruitment points to spend. So pretty nice unit. Okay, let's talk about, let's briefly talk about the different melee troop options that we have. The choice basically comes down to what kind of weapon you want your melee troop to have. All of these troops, including the Knight and the Guardian, have lower than average magic resistance. That is one of Ulm's big weaknesses, is, if you say the average is 10, then this is low MR. You only have 9. And so if you're fighting against like Relay, for example, or Ulm, I guess, who are using, not Ulm, Agartha, who are using Mind Blasts, then, that's a big issue. So they all have pretty low magic resist. In addition, they're all wearing heavy armor, so they do have 5 encumbrance, but that's actually not too bad considering how much armor they have. 5 encumbrance is not that bad. 6 encumbrance on the more heavily armored guys. It's just, you have to keep in mind, they're wearing full plate, right? So if you're fighting against a Death Nation, and they're going to be doing Rigor Mortis or something like that, or just any nation that can spam fatigue, Ulm doesn't have easy nature access for relief, and so fatigue might be an issue. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. All right, other than that, basically the general theme, and I'll just show the super heavy armored one, because as the game goes on, these are the guys you're going to use. Again, the only difference is extra protection and extra cost. Compared to the average human troop, you have a bit more hit points. You have 12 hit points. And then the choice is, what weapon do you want? So we have the choice between a battle axe, which is 22 slashing damage, and you have like it gives you 1 attack and 0 defense. Another option is the maul, which is 22 damage, but here we have a minus to defense and just no bonus to attack, right? So you'll notice we're getting 1 extra damage, so 22. Oh no, actually it's the same damage, sorry. Still 22, but we're getting blunt. However, we are losing attack and defense, right? Compared to this one. So we're losing 1 attack and 1 defense. So is it worth it to have blunt versus slashing? Not really. It depends, I guess. Like there are a lot of, I guess, so the difference, so you can look up in the manual the exact details of slashing damage versus blunt damage. If you're fighting somebody with very high protection, slashing is the least useful damage type. Piercing has sort of an bigger armor penetrating effect, and blunt will do a bit more damage overall. So that might be a situation, but I would choose the pikes instead for the piercing damage, or actually, well, there are other options. Yeah, I guess now that I think about it, like if I was going against heavy armor, well, let's go through all the units before we talk about this. So, anyways, keep this in mind. This guy has lower attack and defense, and all you're getting for it is blunt damage. Now, since I mentioned it, let's talk about the Pikeneers. The Pikeneers are a lot of fun because, well, they do less damage. It's 18 piercing. They also have lower attack and defense, but they have a length 5 weapon. And a length 5 weapon is amazing because you will get a ton of repel. So even though his defense is really low, the effective defense of this unit is quite high because most of the attacks are going to get repelled. And that is very good. So this is a very good unit because of that. Even though the damage is not as high, you're going to have a lot of repels. Another interesting weapon is the Flail. Now the Flail, you might notice, has only 16 damage, but you get 2 attacks per turn. And although we have a penalty to defense, we have a +1 to attack, and we get a +2 attack versus shield. So in effect, if you're fighting shields, this is a 12 attack unit with 2 attacks per turn. So if you know what you're fighting against, if you were, for example, it's hard, when you're expanding and fighting indies, because there are often different indie types all around you, so you can't just make the one perfect unit. But if you were fighting a nation that was using chaff, with like the whole nation just had guys with shields, right? And there are a lot of nations that are kind of like that. Then having a bunch of these guys to run into their chaff, they are going to mow through them, right? Especially if they're kind of like one of the Greek-themed nations or the Roman-themed nations who you might not necessarily build heavy infantry. They might be sort of medium or light infantry, but they all have shields. These guys are going to destroy them. But other than that, they're pretty bad, right? Because if it's like a highly armored, 16 damage is not going to get, you're not going to get as much mileage out of that as you are fighting giants with this would be useless, right? You should go for the battle axe, right? If you're fighting giants. Anyway, so that's worth pointing out the difference between all these weapons. Now we have 2 different kinds of guys with shields. We have the hammer guys. So again, these guys have a tower shield, so it is a great idea to have some of these when you're expanding, assuming you're expanding into archers. And if you're just fighting a nation that has a lot of archery, then these guys are fantastic. The hammer gives you blunt and piercing with a -1 to defense, whereas the Morning Star gives you a -2 defense, but a +2 attack versus shield. And I think, let's see, 17. Yeah, the hammer does a bit more damage. Well, let's count it here. So 10-10, a bit more damage. So you get a bit of a penalty, whereas the hammer, you're getting a bonus on the attack, plus an extra bonus on the shield. So these guys are a better choice against any kind of infantry with a shield, because 13 attack is quite respectable. Um, Otherwise, if you know, like if you're just fighting archers and you're not going to run into guys with shields, then I guess you go for the hammer guys, right? So there's a lot of really subtle choices. It doesn't make a huge difference. It's only one or two in stats, but if you can optimize a weapon choice against the kind of enemy that you're fighting, then, you know, it can make a big difference. Okay, let's talk about the commanders. We don't have a cheap scout, but we do have a spy. And spies are nice because you can see what throne it is, and you could see all sorts of sites that have been searched already, and you could do fun things like instill uprising, cause unrest in their capital and whatnot. So anyways, it's nice that we have spies. Unfortunately, it's not an assassin, but what can you do? Then you've got a few commanders. You've basically got commander versions of these guys. So we've got commander with a hammer and heavier armor, and then commander with a morning star, and commander with a morning star with heavier armor. So whatever. They all have leadership 80, but they're kind of slow, whereas the Black Lord has higher map move because he's got 16. So whereas these guys only have 10. So I like to build these if I can afford them, just because I have higher map move. And also, there's a fun thing that you can do with these that I tried doing in this game, and it was, I guess partially successful. But we can forge a lot of really cheap gear. So you can give these guys, like, 2 braces of protection and, like, a magic weapon. Like, you can give them a sword, which would replace the Morning Star, but add, like, effectively give them +4 defense. And then these commanders become amazing mini-thugs that you can send to clear indies. Like, they go to like 17, 18 defense, 23 protection, 17 hit points. They become very effective at fighting indies or clearing PD, right? So this is a fun little chassis to do that. All right, in terms of mages, we have a random H1 priest. He's pretty cheap if you need to spam priest, I guess. We have another priest who is where's the... Oh, no, that is a guy that I was thinking of. Okay, it must be a different version of that I was thinking. Yeah, we have a cap-only priest who is H2 and also is an inquisitor, so good for preaching out dominion. Importantly, this guy has earth and holy, and so does the other cap-only guy who is a priest-smith who has earth 2 and holy. And importantly, the evocation spell for that it makes special is Iron Darts at level 3, which requires earth and holy, and then Iron Blizzard at level 6. These are amazing spells. It's like it's basically like a whole bunch of crossbows. It is armor piercing, 10 magical damage, and also ×2 versus magic beings, and you get 30 plus of them. So number of effects are increased by 5 for each extra level the caster is, and this is an Earth 1. So the priests are Earth 2. You're going to summon Earth Power to Earth 3, so you're going to get 40 magic crossbow bolts. Very, very powerful evocation magic happening from So that's what these guys are going to be doing, right? And then you have the Recruit Anywhere mages. They're not holy, but they're just Earth, Fire, and Earth 2. So a lot of Earth magic basically is happening with And you can random into Air and Astral, which is kind of nice. However, other than that, we have no magic diversity, which is one of the limitations of So you often want to get that on your Pretender. Finally, the other 2 guys that are worth mentioning, we have a Mason, which is going to allow us to upgrade our forts to citadels to get a ton of recruitment, to be able to recruit even more commanders every turn. And we have the commander version of the Guardian, the Anti-Sacred. So similar idea here. He has the Black Halberd with the Bane of Heresy. However, in addition, he also has Halt Heretic, which is like awe for sacreds. So he has like Anti-Sacred awe. Very cool commander if you're fighting against sacreds. All right, that's a nation overview. We get a lot of earth gems at the beginning. That's all we get. So it's in some sense it's very one-dimensional, but there's actually a lot of like you can really customize and be very effective in a lot of situations if you choose your units right. And then Alm just has a lot of raw strength. Like the evocation is just really powerful, so the opponent really has to be careful and they have to really be clever, otherwise they risk just losing a ton of units when they weren't expecting it. Okay, so as a pretender, what can you do? Well, I mean, you could do a Wake Expander, but you don't need to get a Bless with Ulm, right? The only sacreds are your mages. So if you're going to get a Bless, the only sacreds really are these guys. If you're going to get a Bless that that helps casters, right? So something like Reinvig and Earth makes sense. Now, because the map we're playing on is a very large map and has the potential to be a very long game, I went for a rainbow magic diversity crafting guy. And one of the chassis that you could use here is not the Master Alchemist, but the Eldest Dwarf. So he's a rainbow chassis. His new magic paths cost 20 each. However, he has Master Smith, which means that he can craft at one level above what he knows. So, for example, when we take this guy, let's say I want to be able to forge the Fire Booster, which normally costs F4. Well, I can just have him at F3, and that's enough. He'll be able to forge an F4 item. So you don't actually need to have high paths on this guy. Like if you do even 2 almost in everything, this basically, or 2 or 3, once you get to construction 6, you can build like almost everything in the game. I'm kidding, of course. Maybe you need like Astral 4, and you can almost build everything in the game with this guy. Now you need the gems, of course, but you know, that's a whole other story. So let me load up and show you the pretender that I built. It was a Master Smith. Let's load him up. I believe it was Reginald II. All right, so we yeah, like I said, we don't need very high amounts in all the paths. So let's talk about the little blessed part. So I did bother to get Earth 4 and Astral 4 because that gives us a useful bless for our mages. We get Reinvigoration 2 and we get Farcaster so that our evocation spam can be even more deadly. We took 5 candles. Honestly, 4 would have been fine. The only issue is I don't know if we could have gotten like, we didn't really need the extra magic paths, so I don't know. It wouldn't get you much points, but maybe I can rejig this a little bit better. You don't need a lot of candles as Ulm. If you are threatened by Dominion, you have the cap-only priests that are H2 and Inquisitors, so they can fight against Dominion pretty well. And we get some free points by being able to take Drain. So we have Misfortune, we have Scales, basically. And this guy's only dormant. He's not imprisoned, which is pretty good for these kinds of scales. So we have Order 2, Prod 3, we took a bit of Cold, and Growth 3. And then in terms of paths, yeah, so we have the Bless. And then this allows us to forge basically everything. Air 3, because it's hard. Air is one of the hardest paths to boost if you're not already at 4, but remember he has Master Smith, so air 3 is enough to forge the air boosters. Fire can be boosted with just Fire and Death, gets you to F4 and then gets you to F3, but remember always add 1 for this guy, so that basically after that allows you to craft the other fire boosters. Earth Astral at 4 is enough. Like Astral 4 is enough to craft everything with this guy because of boosts and whatnot. Same thing with Water. Even Water 1 would be enough because at Construction 6, Water 1 gets us to Water 2. And then this guy at Water 2 is crafting as though he were Water 3. So then you can forge the robes. So even Water 1 would be possible. But this allows you to get it earlier, basically. You can... this allows me to, at Construction 4, I could already boost into Water. Same thing, Death. Death, this one is a little trickier because Death, the first booster is just Death 2. But then the next one is... I'm off the top of my head, I can't remember if it's just Death 4 or Death 5. Yeah, I can't quite remember. Nature is a similar thing. We can get Thistle Mace, we can get Moonvine Bracelet. That would bring you to Nature 4, and that would be enough to craft the Tree Lord Staff, which is Nature 5, but this guy has Master Smith. And Blood is nice to have because if you get Blood income, then you can forge the temporary Earth Gem, the Bloodstone, which is a great item as well. So this guy's job is basically he's going to come online after year 1. He's going to site search for us and then craft stuff, right? That's basically all he's there to do. So that is the build. That is the nation. I managed to fit it in about half an hour, so I'm happy about that. Next episode, we'll look at the map and start going into the turns. So, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this series. I can't wait to get to it. See you guys in the next episode in the first turn. Take care.